The world was fading. Renjiro Takamura, once a diligent salaryman, lay on his deathbed in the cramped confines of his apartment. His body was frail, his breath shallow. His life had been long yet unfulfilled, decades spent at the office, chasing deadlines instead of dreams. Regret weighed heavier than his failing body. If only I had lived differently. As his vision blurred, a strange warmth embraced him, like the gentle touch of a new morning sun. The pain, the exhaustion, the regrets, they all dissolved into the light. And then, he awoke. Ren gasped as consciousness flooded back. His body felt heavy, stronger than before. The sensation of warm stone pressed against his back, and the murmur of voices echoed around him. Slowly, he opened his eyes. He was lying inside a vast chamber, illuminated by floating blue crystals embedded in the walls. The air smelled of incense and old parchment. Before him stood a group of robed figures, their expressions shifting from awe to horror. "He is an orc?" one of them whispered. Ren blinked. An orc? He struggled to sit up, but the movement felt alien. His limbs were thick with muscle, his skin a deep shade of green. He raised a hand, his fingers were broader, tipped with dark nails. A lock of coarse black hair fell into his vision. "What happened to me?" "Impossible," another voice hissed. "The summoning was meant to call forth a hero of legend, not this beast." The tension in the chamber grew thick. Ren's mind raced. He was summoned? He was meant to be a hero? A young knight, gripping the hilt of his sword, took a step forward. "He's dangerous," he said. "Orcs are monsters. We should eliminate it before it turns on us." Ren's breath hitched. "Wait." The king, seated upon a throne at the far end of the hall, narrowed his eyes. "Kill it," he commanded. The knights drew their swords. Panic surged through Ren. He scrambled to his feet, heart pounding like a war drum. His instincts screamed, "Run!" The first knight lunged. Steel flashed through the air. Ren's body moved before his mind could catch up. His muscles tensed, and he sidestepped with unnatural speed. The knight's blade struck the stone floor where he had been mere seconds ago, sending sparks flying. "I'm faster than I should be, stronger too." Another knight charged, aiming for his chest. Ren reacted purely on instinct, raising an arm to block. The sword clashed against his forearm, pain flared, but the blade didn't cut deep. His skin was tougher than a human's. "I can fight." His hands clenched into fists. He didn't want to die again, not when he had just been given another chance. The knights hesitated. It blocked the attack?" one stammered. A voice boomed through the chamber. "Enough!" The tension froze as a woman stepped forward. She wore silver armor etched with glowing runes, a crimson cape billowing behind her. Her piercing blue eyes studied Ren with an unreadable expression. "Sir Aldrich," she addressed the knight who had attacked first. "Stand down." The knight stiffened. "But Lady Cassandra, we summoned him," she cut in, her voice firm. "We must learn what he is before we decide his fate." The king scowled but gave a begrudging nod. "Very well, bind him. If he resists, you have my permission to kill him." Cold steel shackles clamped around Ren's wrists. He didn't resist, not yet. As the knights dragged him away, he cast one last glance at the glowing crystals in the chamber. This wasn't a dream. This was real. He was in another world. And this time, he wouldn't waste his second chance. Ren sat in the dimly lit cell, his back resting against the cold stone wall. Heavy iron shackles bound his wrists, their weight a constant reminder of his status as a prisoner. His surroundings were nothing more than rough-hewn stone, a single barred window letting in a sliver of moonlight. He exhaled slowly. Well, this is a hell of a way to start a second life. Now that he had a moment of peace, Ren took the chance to inspect his new body properly. His arms were thick with muscle, denser than his frail human limbs had ever been. His legs felt powerful, his chest broader. This strength, it feels you unreal. He clenched his fists, testing his grip. Even without formal training, he could tell that his new body was built for combat. But there was something else, an unfamiliar energy pulsing beneath his skin. Something he had never felt in his old life. His musings were interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing down the stone hallway. The torchlight flickered as a figure approached his cell. A knight. It was the same woman from the throne room, the one who had stopped the others from executing him. She stood outside his cell, arms crossed, her piercing blue eyes studying him. Her silver armor gleamed even in the dim light, and the crimson cape draped over her shoulders gave her an air of authority. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she sighed. "You don't look like a monster." Ren raised an eyebrow. "And you don't sound like someone who wants me dead. That makes you the first." The knight smirked slightly before unlocking the cell door. She stepped inside, though her hand remained near the hilt of her sword. "I am Lady Cassandra Valter, captain of the Royal Knights," she introduced herself. "And you?" Ren hesitated before answering. Renjiro Takamura, but you can call me Ren. Cassandra tilted her head. A strange name. I wasn't exactly born in this world, he admitted. She frowned. You were summoned, yet your soul took the form of an orc. I've never heard of such a thing. Ren let out a dry chuckle. Neither have I. Cassandra studied him for a moment before leaning against the bars of his cell. Tell me, Ren, do you know what an orc is in this world? Ren thought back to all the fantasy stories he'd read. In my world stories, orcs were usually savage warriors, but they had societies, culture. They weren't mindless monsters. Cassandra's expression darkened. That is not how they are seen here. She turned her gaze toward the barred window. The world is divided into 3 concentric layers. The innermost circle belongs to humans, the noble, civilized races who rule from their cities. The second layer is where the demi-humans live, beastkin, elves, dwarves. They are tolerated, but only barely. Many are slaves or live as outcasts. Her expression darkened. And finally, the outermost circle where the monster and demons dwell. Beasts, creatures, and savage races like orcs. Humans believe anything in that layer is a threat. Ren processed her words carefully. So just by being an orc, I'm automatically seen as a monster? Cassandra nodded. Exactly. Ren clenched his fists. This world, its structure was flawed. Humans at the center, demi-humans struggling in the middle, and anything else condemned as a threat. It was a system built on fear and prejudice. Cassandra watched his reaction before continuing. Most people have never seen an orc in person. They only know the stories, tales of brutal raiders and mindless beasts that kill and destroy. Ren scoffed. Sounds like propaganda. Cassandra's lips curled into a slight smirk. Perhaps, but it's what people believe. A silence settled between them, and then, almost hesitantly, Cassandra added, Though, I know another side of the story. Ren raised an eyebrow. Oh? She glanced to the side, her voice quieter now. Years ago, I was on an expedition in the outer layer. My group was ambushed by monsters. During the chaos, I was separated, lost, wounded, and alone. Her fingers curled slightly against her armored gauntlets. I should have died. She looked back at Ren, and for the first time, he saw something different in her eyes. Not judgment, but memory. But a group of orcs found me. Ren's eyes widened. They didn't kill me. They didn't eat me or torture me like the stories say. Cassandra shook her head. They saved me, gave me food, tended to my wounds, and when I was strong enough, they escorted me back to my party. A strange emotion stirred in Ren's chest. If orcs were as brutal as humans claimed, why would they save an injured human? Did you ever tell anyone? He asked. Cassandra's smirk returned, but it was bitter. What do you think? Ren sighed. No one would believe you. She nodded. If I said orcs helped me, they would think I was lying, or worse, that I had been corrupted. Ren let the words sink in. This world had already decided its truths. It didn't matter if orcs were capable of kindness. Humans refused to see them as anything but monsters. Finally, Cassandra straightened, her gaze sharpening. That's why I wanted to see you. You don't act like a monster. You speak with reason, and you don't seem like a mindless beast. Ren smirked. Glad to hear it. Cassandra exhaled and turned toward the stairs. I don't know what the king will decide. Most likely they'll want to execute you. Figures. She glanced over her shoulder. Bet, if you truly are different, then prove it. Ren met her gaze, and in that moment, an understanding passed between them. Cassandra leaves him alone in his cell. He had been in this dungeon for days, long enough to lose count. The knights only came to shove food through the bars and leave, treating him like an animal in a cage. Ren sighed, looking down at himself, a loincloth. That was all they gave him. I was an old man in a full suit before this. Now I'm a half-naked orc sitting in a dungeon. Not exactly the noble second life I was hoping for. Still, as much as he hated his situation, there was one undeniable fact. He was alive, more alive than he had ever been. He lifted his arms, flexing his muscles. They were thick and powerful, unlike the frail limbs he had in his last life. He clenched his fists, feeling the raw strength surging through his veins. His body, once weak and tired, was now bursting with energy. Standing up, he stretched, marveling at how effortlessly his joints moved. No more aching bones, no more back pain. I feel incredible. Curious about his limits, he crouched low before leaping into the air. His head nearly hit the ceiling. Landing lightly, he grinned. His legs were strong, far stronger than they had any right to be. He pressed a hand against the stone wall and pushed. His fingers sank into the stone slightly, leaving a faint imprint. His heart raced with excitement. He wasn't just strong, he was something more. And then, he noticed it. At first, he thought it was just the dim torchlight flickering in the hall outside his cell. But as he focused, he saw faint trails of shimmering energy, twisting and curling through the air. The stone. Walls pulsed with it, the iron bars shimmered faintly, even the moldy straw on the floor had wisps of something unseen. What is this? He blinked, rubbing his eyes. No, it wasn't an illusion. He could see something else, a force that was woven into everything in this world. Is this magic? As a human, he had never been able to see such things, but now, with his orc body, it was as clear as day. Ren took a deep breath. This world is full of mysteries, and I've barely scratched the surface. A week passed. Ren had grown accustomed to the hunger, to the isolation. The knights no longer even looked at him when they brought food. Then, finally, the heavy iron door at the end of the hall creaked open. Cassandra stepped inside, her silver armor polished, her crimson cape draped over her shoulder. She stopped in front of his cell, arms crossed. "You're surprisingly alive," she noted. Ren smirked. "It takes more than bad food and solitude to kill me." Cassandra huffed a quiet chuckle before her expression turned serious. "The king has made his decision." Ren raised an eyebrow. "You ought to be banished." Ren frowned. "Banishment?" Cassandra nodded. "You will be taken beyond the human lands, past the demi-human territories, and into the outer rim where monsters roam." Ren leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Better than being executed, I suppose." She studied him for a moment before speaking again, her tone quieter. "Honestly, this is the best outcome you could have hoped for." Ren's eyes narrowed. "Why do I get the feeling you had something to do with Tad?" Cassandra didn't answer right away. Instead, she sighed. "Consider it a favor. You didn't deserve to die for simply existing." Ren smirked. "I'll take what I can get." She glanced at the iron bars before pulling out a key. With a quick turn, the cell door swung open. "Come on," she said. "They're waiting." The courtyard of the castle was eerily quiet as Ren was led outside. An armored cart sat in the middle, surrounded by knights. The vehicle was reinforced with thick metal plates and small barred windows, designed to transport dangerous creatures. Ren took a deep breath, feeling the sunlight on his skin for the first time in days. The knight shoved him forward. "Get in." He cast one last glance at Cassandra. She stood by the steps, arms still crossed, watching him closely. "Any parting words?" Ren asked with a smirk. Cassandra's expression remained unreadable. "Try not to die." Ren chuckled and stepped into the cart. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound of a heavy lock clicking into place. Then, without another word, the cart lurched forward, rolling toward the gates of the city. Ren leaned back against the cold metal wall, staring at the faint traces of magic still swirling in the air. He was being sent to the outer rim, to the land of monsters. Monsters.